This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Sujata Srinivasan, filling in for Catherine Shen. Connecticut's emergency shelters served more than 5,000 people last year. That's according to the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. But housing advocates say that the shelter model is a temporary solution from stakeholders. Today, we hear from the person behind Rosette Neighborhood Village on Rosette Street in New Haven. It's in the backyard of what's known as Amistad House. We hear about the Rosette model, how stable transitional housing for unhoused people is leading to better health outcomes. Residents are hoping to live in pallet shelters soon, prefabricated tiny homes set up on site so they can live safely, they say, with privacy, dignity, and in better health. Joining us in the studio today are Mark Colville, the housing activist behind Rosette Village. Mark and his wife Luz live at Amistad House. The village is in their backyard. Also in the studio, Suki Godek, an unhoused activist living at Rosette. It's a pleasure to see you both again. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Welcome to the show. Mark, let me start with you. When people walk into Rosette Village in your backyard at Amistad House, what do they see?
Well, the first thing they see, hopefully when they walk through the gate, is that we've posted a sign over a year ago now. We posted a sign entering the backyard declaring that the space back there is now a human rights zone. And what we mean by that is that we have claimed that space as a particular spot where the human right to take refuge on public land when the state does not provide you with adequate housing, that right will be respected. That right actually comes from the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So it's a very authoritative, particularly for the United States, as we are constitutionally bound to the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And so we noticed that this right is not respected on public land in the city of New Haven. And so we decided that we needed to carve out a space for people who are homeless in order that right be respected. So when you walk through the gate, you'll see a pretty ordered conglomeration of tents and homes that people have set up. We actually, we've welcomed people again since June of 22, we've been welcoming people into the backyard in order to try to get, again, this policy change that we need in New Haven. So you have people who have set up homes there, and they're living cooperatively and self-governing. And Amistad's role, our House of Hospitality, has pledged to give them some basic infrastructure like running water and electricity and such, and the ability to cook and store their stuff and clean themselves and do laundry and such, So we've set up an environment in which we want it to be a model of what a supported tent city would look like.
And I understand now that your resources are stretched even further. You have more backyard neighbors now. And we met a few of them when I interviewed you under the Elo Grasso Boulevard overpass. And those people were later evicted by the city. And some of them now are living at Rosette. How are they doing?
Well, it was, as you might imagine, some of the folks living under the bridge over there by the train tracks had been there for as much as 3 years. And so their homes were suddenly violently destroyed, and they were scattered to the neighborhood. Now, at Amistad, we've also made a public pledge to the city that every time they scatter people in such a way, that we will gather them back together. And so essentially what we did in the backyard, I would equate it to setting up a field hospital, in the middle of a battlefield. We simply had to, we went to under the bridge. We invited people, anybody who wanted to take refuge in our backyard, to come on over, and we would figure it out. And that's what we went about doing. And Suki was one of the main workers in trying to help figure that out. So that's what we did.
And Suki, you yourself were evicted from Tent City. You told me when I interviewed you for the feature that I was there for.
Absolutely. I was also, I'm not only an unhoused activist, but we like to, call us basically, refugees of sorts. And we sort of lost, our home and everything we hold dear to us at the Tent City evictions, and now we've formed this new and I believe a better community, that's much closer over at Rosette, and I think that it's going to be absolutely an awesome model. I really hope that a lot of cities, look at this and can see, the benefits.
Tell me why you and others who've been evicted from public spaces chose to come to Rosette instead of moving to a shelter.
Well, when you go to a shelter, you're essentially giving up your right to privacy. You're giving up your right to have your loved ones with you. I would be separated from my husband, who's at this point my only prized possession. And you need everything you can for support, especially through times like that, for your mental health and for other things as well. But so that was the big thing for me, was I didn't want to be separated. I didn't want to give up all my belongings. I didn't want to give up my right to work past 8 p.m. and be, kicked back out in the morning at 5, 6 in the morning. There are a lot of factors like that people take into account, when they're deciding whether to go to a shelter. And for us, it just wasn't a reasonable or even logical decision. This is much more, real life, and it definitely fits a lot more people's needs, I believe.
Tell me how staying together as a family is conducive and necessary for your mental health. Talk to me a little bit, share with me a little bit about your story.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everybody needs a support system. We all draw on our family in times of need, and a lot of us, that have found ourselves in these situations due to whatever life choices or paths we chose, sometimes don't have those support systems. So a community like this really kind of gives you that. It's that feeling of home and that feeling of community that makes us neighbors, not, decriminalizing the homeless. It makes it more of a human, it really is a human rights concern. It's just your basic right to live somewhere, to be safe, to, just be yourself and not live in fear of, losing everything that's dear to you in a moment's notice.
Mark, you have rules at Rosette. I understand that residents cannot use substances on site.
Yeah, we we have a few rules, very few actually, and certainly our preference is that whatever rules or accountability that needs to be achieved in the backyard, that come from the people there. Essentially we look at it as a micro neighborhood, and I often remind folks that my neighborhood's in the front, although I do have a stake in the backyard neighborhood. But as far as, we've been a house of hospitality at Amistad for 30 years now, since 1994, and we've had a basic rule that we don't want drugs or alcohol on the property. So that being said, when we invite people into the backyard, we're giving them not a tent, we're giving them a piece of land, and that gives you rights and responsibilities. I ask people, as a matter of integrity, to respect the rules that we already had in place for the property when we first arrived. And with that being said, we are not narcotics officers, nor do we wish to invade anybody's privacy unless there was, it's an absolute emergency situation, So we're giving people the independence to work out their own lives and lifestyles and struggles and such, as anybody, as everybody deserves to do on their own private property.
And you do have a humane take on why unhoused people turn to substances.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a real one of the myths about homelessness. By the way, given the policy in New Haven with regard to homelessness, namely criminalization, it's in order to hold that policy in place, it becomes, at least from our perspective, it becomes very clear that there's a necessity there to blame the person for their homelessness and to not allow the systemic realities to really come into play. And that, therefore, we tend to identify a, quote, homeless person with drug abuse, which is, again, a myth, okay? Drug abuse is often becomes a response to the reality of chronic homelessness in terms of people needing to numb themselves to the reality in which they're living. And so we don't make moral judgments on that kind of thing. We like to point to the fact that these people are not being recognized as persons again because they do not have a legally sanctioned place to exist, and that has serious implications for mental health as well as physical health among our people.
Suki, would you be comfortable sharing with us how you lost your home?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I actually lived on a rather large dairy farm with my husband. And when COVID hit, we were literally pouring milk down the drain. So all 40 employees of this farm lost our homes. We lost our vehicles, everything. And my husband's family, wanted us to move up here to Connecticut to be closer. And unfortunately, his father's health decreased, and we've sort of made our home here. But we started here with nothing, and we found ourselves at the train station. We didn't have anywhere to go. I had actually had someone at the train station steal my wallet the first 2 days I was in Connecticut. So I couldn't get a job immediately when I got here, and it just so happened that I saw someone walking towards the soccer field, and they said, "Hey, there's a tent city back here. There's some people that have tents set up that you can, leave your things and they won't be bothered." And so we gave it a try. We got a tent and we set it up, and we ended up being at Tent City for about 7 months. And then we were evicted in April, and then we ended up at Amistad and have been there now for about 4 months.
Right, and this is a sort of a self-governing community in a way that I understand that everyone had to vote in order to make space for those that were most recently evicted.
Well, we don't say vote. We say a consensus. We reached the consensus. Everybody, agrees on everything, and that way everyone feels that their opinion is valued. It's not, they won or us against them or, whatever. We try to discourage that kind of thinking. So it was, a group decision to allow these people to come. And most of the time, no one has any objections to different people in those situations, and we really do try to honor that. If you don't have a place, we'll find you one. If you need help, we'll give it to you. Even with the people in substance abuse, it's well known throughout the neighborhood that if you are a user or even selling drugs, that if you need help, these people will help you.
The thing about losing one's home, isn't it, Suki and Mark? A few missed paychecks, a major illness. I spoke to one of your neighbors at Rosette Village, Bliss Sarania. Here's what she told me.
I have some really deep trauma in my past, couple different PTSD diagnoses from different time. I was abused really bad as a child, and then what actually led to my homelessness was I was living in Alabama with my partner Gavin, my soulmate. He was amazing, and one day he just died from an aneurysm, and he was only 25 years old, and losing all of his income plus all of his support, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't afford my rent. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't in a place to be able to, face it. I also have lupus and fibromyalgia. I don't know. I want to be part of the world. I want to contribute. I want to be like, look at this thing I made. I want to be like, motivated. But in order to be able to do that, you have to have a foundation under you, And that's part of what Amistad provides is if you're spending all your emotional and mental energy just surviving, there's no energy to better your life, to go to school, to go to work, to whatever. But when you have a home that is going to be there for you, in a bed that you're going to be sleeping in every night, that gives you a lot more ability to go out there and fight the fight and deal with the stress and take on the world,
Mark, could you respond to what we just heard from Bliss?
Yeah, well, it touches my heart to hear that testimony, and it also doesn't surprise me because I would say that when we first set up the backyard village, that I had many sleepless nights just looking out my window in the backyard, and I'm talking about initially, just saying, is this the best we can do? For people, and why aren't these people inside my house? And there's a reason for that. The reason is that when they're inside the house, they're not criminalized, okay? but the spaces outside is where they are constantly treated like not human beings. They're treated like, statistics or a social problem. So anyway, my thinking about it and my feelings about the backyard quickly evolved as I saw that as she was saying, you get 2 feet on the ground, when you have an actual legally sanctioned place to be, and from there you can fight your way both out of poverty and into the life that you've aspired to. So it's been beautiful to see that happen with a lot of people, and I thought Bliss articulates that very well.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that too. That's a lot. That's how I feel about it as well. It's that hope that tomorrow is going to be better because you have this safe place where you can wake up every day and have the privacy and the dignity that we all need in order to get up and work. And that has been a huge impact on my mental health and those of all my neighbors at Rosette, and especially Bliss. Said it perfectly. Like that's the exact foundation and support you need from your community in order to have a better, life.
Right, and there's the mental health aspect and the day-to-day nitty-gritty of your physical space. When I visited Rosette, one thing that struck me was how clean it was. And yes, the sense of hope and optimism that you talk about, it was there when I met the residents, and one of them was Megan Kantorowski. And she used to live under the bridge at Lamberton Street in New Haven, and she told me that her asthma back then was really bad. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, there's tons of black mold under there. There's also a lot of rats, so we're exposed to the droppings that get in your food. And I got really sick, actually. I was using my inhaler like 6 times a day at one point. And I use it maybe 3 times a week.
And there were, others that told me that their blood pressure was improving, because people were working out, helping in the community, had a sense of community. But to someone who's been in the field for years, the health outcomes are a no-brainer. But what would be surprising to someone listening, the health outcomes that people don't expect, that come with, even living within a tent, but in the space where they feel safe and a sense of belonging.
Yeah, you're really getting to the, maybe the heart of the issue in terms of these encampments. That they are communities. Even when they're not supported. For example, you've mentioned that the encampment that was just bulldozed under the bridge there. It really hurts me to have seen the way that went down. Actually, the public justification that was given from the mayor's office for bulldozing that encampment was that it was unsafe, relating specifically to the fact that it was near the railroad tracks. But not only that, the justification they used was a person. Okay, his name was Victor Vivar. He was a friend of ours. He sat at our table at Amistad for at least 2 decades for meals. Victor had been encamped further up the river from that spot, and one night the police came in and destroyed all of his stuff. I believe they even took his medications. He had nothing. He was wandering in the middle of the night, and the only place he knew to go was down to where people were camped down there. He wandered down there and apparently was hit by a train. Now, in other words, it was his death was a direct result of an encampment sweep, of a police action sweeping an encampment. And that's exactly what they did last week in the name of safety. This is a tragedy and a scandal that has to stop.
Mark, we're going to be talking to the mayor in a bit. But tell me about your hopes and aspirations. What you have in your backyard is something of a seed, but you have a bigger dream. Tell me about how you envision pallet houses by Thanksgiving, I understand.
Yes. At the beginning of this year, right around January, we started reaching out to folks because people had been watching the news, and we had been actually what we were doing in the backyard was starting to be covered.
Stir some feathers.
Yeah, so people started calling, particularly from the suburbs, several folks from Guilford and East Haddam and such, and they wanted to know what we could do. So we kind of put together a committee which is actually called the Rosette Neighborhood Village Collective, and they went about researching this tiny home reality, which tiny homes is a mode of transitional housing that's now taking shape in many cities across the United States, and these folks decided that it's time to do that in New Haven. So we went about raising money. We just ordered 6 tiny homes, which are going to be assembled before Thanksgiving, and we're going to have a bit of a homecoming. It's hard to emphasize how much of a game changer that is for people when you can actually walk through a door and lock it behind you.
Definitely.
It's a definite game changer from a tent,
especially for women as well. We get a lot of young ladies that live on the streets, and they don't have a safe place. Even with us having our community hut where they can come for emergency if anyone ever needs a place to rest their head, but you run into that problem where there's nowhere safe for you to sleep. And if there's nowhere safe for you to sleep, you stay up longer. That makes your everyday quality of life suffer because you're not thinking clearly, and it puts you in a very vulnerable position. So these homes are really kind of more than just hope. They're a model that we really need to embrace, as a country, and just see how this works, because I think it would change lives.
We have just a few moments. So tell me, Mark, what is the experience of these pallet homes, these tiny homes in other states? I understand Vermont has them. How has the city and how have the communities there responded to it?
Well, all the reports that I've heard are excellent. That it just it improves the quality of life for people. It actually it brings people back into the status of neighbor, and that is particularly I'm a homeowner in my neighborhood. By the way, and people don't really think about, as a homeowner, the impact of sending all these people every day from shelters, let's say.
Back on the street.
To scatter and disappear. They're not recognized as neighbors, even in the poorest neighborhood in New Haven, which is where we live. So it's, this status of personhood, the status of neighbor is so crucial to both the individual person's development and the life of a neighborhood.
Absolutely, and homelessness is always something someone doesn't want to see in their city. They tend to look over that,
And how long are you willing to let people stay in your backyard?
My philosophy is that people should stay until they aspire to something better.
We are hearing from Mark Colville of the Amistad Catholic Worker, Rosette Village, and from Suki Godek, an unhoused activist living at Rosette. Coming up next, we hear from New Haven Mayor Justin Elicker about the city's efforts to combat the problem of people being unhoused. This is Where We Live. I'm Sujata Srinivasan in for Catherine Shen. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Sujata Srinivasan, filling in for Catherine Shen. The number of people who became unhoused in Connecticut increased by 13% between 2021 and last year. That's according to the organization Advancing Connecticut Together. Joining us now via Zoom to talk about what this looks like in New Haven is Mayor Justin Elicker. Mayor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
And in the studio with us, Mark Colville of the Amistad Catholic Worker, Rosette Village. Mayor, I'd like to start with you. Mark Colville has a growing backyard community of unhoused people who moved there after they were evicted from Tent City and more recently from under the El Grasso Boulevard overpass, and they now live in Rosette Village on Rosette Street in New Haven. do you see this as a viable solution on private or even public land?
So first of all, I'd like to start by saying that this is a very challenging issue, and there's no easy solutions, and cities around the nation are struggling with it.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, the way that we address this in the long term is through affordable housing and ensuring that there's more access to affordable housing and other supports for people that are struggling with homelessness. And the city is doing a lot in the meantime to increase the number of emergency beds that exist. I know there's been a lot of interest by Mark and the group of advocates that he's been working with about a endorsed public site that we could have an encampment in the city. We effectively have that now in many ways. We do not, and I think there's some things that were mischaracterizations that were said earlier on. We do not criminalize people that are homeless. And the reality is that the people working both for the city that are focused on homelessness from our Department of Community Resilience, the many nonprofit organizations, Elm City Compass, and our state partners at DEMIS work very, very hard to help the individuals that are most vulnerable in our community. And I think to frame this as the city criminalizing people or evicting people with no reason is not fair to the work of the people that are working very, very hard to help support people. We're focused on in the short term increasing the number of beds, and I think one thing that Suki said is very important, that the congregate shelter model. There's some individuals experiencing homelessness that have a pet. There may be families, and we do have some family shelters, but we're trying to expand that. I presented to the Board of Alders, and they're reviewing now the acquisition of a hotel on Route 80 that would add 56 hotel rooms that would allow us much more flexibility to support people that are experiencing homelessness. But the ultimate solution here is, I think, in our view as a city, not to have endorsed encampments, but to focus on expanding options for emergency housing and expand affordable housing in the city.
Mark, briefly, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, to say that you're not criminalizing people who are homeless flies in the face of reality, particularly the reality of last week, where there were people that were encamped under that bridge for 3 years. And I don't care where you live. If you've lived someplace for 3 years, that's your home. And if you're going to evict somebody from there, you bring them into an apartment. If not, you are criminalizing their lives. Also, that particular encampment, in order to get there, you needed to walk through private property. In other words, there's a neighbor there, a homeowner, who opened their gate for several years, welcoming people into that space. Those are our neighbors, and they got scattered into the neighborhood, and we essentially had to set up a field hospital in our backyard to take care of them. That is criminalization.
Gentlemen, if I may, so both of you are approaching this heartbreaking and very real problem of people being unhoused in different ways. But getting back to what the city has been doing, I understand that New Haven allocates $1.4 million from its general fund, budget fund, to support unhoused people. But not everyone's happy with the shelter system. Earlier, I interviewed Rico Jones, excuse me, a carpenter living at Rosette Village who's been at shelters and says, never again.
You might as well just go to prison. They search you when you come in. They take your stuff from you. They don't allow you to bring in your own food. Their food is substandard or trash. You have to leave at 7:30 every morning without fail. You are kicked out whether it's raining outside or you're sick. They don't care.
Mayor Elicker, could you respond to what we've just heard here? I mean, from Jones's perspective, it doesn't seem like he has an option at a shelter to be able to build a life.
Sure. So I think that it is true that the shelters are not ideal circumstances, and I think we all can agree on that. I would say, specific to the encampment that was referenced under the boulevard, there was a months-long effort by outreach workers to help support people to find a landing place. Everyone was offered a bed who was at the encampment. And I think that we can agree that the congregate shelters are not the ideal model. All that being said, we're working very hard to, and I mentioned the hotel, to expand the options for individuals so that the people can have more of a sense of a dignity, people can have more private space, people don't have to leave the congregate shelter at 7 a.m. in the morning. And I think that is the pathway that we're working to activate this hotel, presuming the Board of Alders approves it, come wintertime, so that we can provide more options for people that are in these difficult circumstances. I would emphasize we do not remove encampments unless we have a public safety concern. Specific to the El Grasso and Lamberton overpass encampments, this was on state land. The state made a decision, which we supported, because people were camping right next to the train tracks. People were walking across the train tracks. It was not a safe environment. But to say that people were suddenly told to leave is just not accurate. The city pushed the state for months to make sure that everyone had the support, engagement that individuals needed, so that we could work to find a solution. There's not perfect solutions here, but we're working very hard under a difficult circumstance when we're seeing a lot more people around the nation and New Haven experiencing homelessness, to help support people.
Talking about what's going on in the nation, what's your take on tiny homes in addition to the expansion to the hotel model? How do you think tiny homes for the unhoused population on public land, perhaps, or private land, could address some of these problems?
So we're very interested in the concept and are looking into the concept. And I think it's more challenging than one might think. That being said, we're very interested in the concept. I'd emphasize that, there's a lot of talk about public land, and public land is for all of the public. And I think there's a tension here between designating what we call public land for a small group of people versus for the use of everyone. That being said, we are looking at different properties around the city that might have the potential for the construction of tiny homes. It's more challenging than just putting up, a shed that one buys at Home Depot or a container home, because we have building codes for a reason. If there is an extreme weather event, or the homes need to be winterized, they need to be safe. And the city, if we were going to support and endorse a site, we need to make sure they're safe. So there needs to be some sort of foundation. There needs some sort of utility hookup. And so it is more challenging than one might think. All that being said, we're very interested in the concept, and we think it's one of the many things that we need to be doing to provide more options for people that are struggling with housing right now.
Thanks to New Haven Mayor Justin Elicker for being on the show today, and to Mark Colville of the Amistad Catholic Worker Rosette Village. Coming up, we learn more about what's being done in the emergency room to care for unhoused people. This is Where We Live. I'm Sujata Srinivasan, filling in for Catherine Shen. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Sujata Srinivasan in for Catherine Shen. Studies in France, Canada, and California found that supportive and stable housing led to better access to medical care and to better outcomes. That's according to the Urban Institute. Here with us in the studio, Dr. Caitlin Rice, instructor in emergency medicine at Yale. Dr. Rice, delighted to have you here.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Tell me about your work at the Yale ED Homelessness Task Force.
Sure. So by training, I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I work clinically in our emergency department. I also conduct research that examines health outcomes among patients experiencing homelessness and how those health outcomes are reflected or impacted by local housing policies. And then as part of my work, I also am on the board of directors at the Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen. And then you asked about the Yale Emergency Department Task Force, Homelessness Task Force. That's something I run. It sort of originated out of a research project. It was a community-based participatory research project, and we bring together people from the patient population, patients experiencing homelessness, social workers, nurses, residents, and trainees. We also bring together hospital administrators, people from local homelessness service organizations, really try anyone who is a stakeholder in this space. And we try to meet, monthly to quarterly, depending on kind of what the community needs are. And we try to be flexible based on those.
You spoke about the impact on health outcomes, depending on the various housing models in the city and in the state. Could you talk about how the traditional shelter model, in and out in 90 days, the separation of families, strict curfew times, is impacting physical and mental health among the unhoused population that you see?
Yeah, I think that it's important to recognize that homelessness is a traumatizing experience, and a lot of people experiencing homelessness have trauma histories. And the traditional shelter model in which you have these communal spaces and that lack of privacy is very difficult for people with a history of trauma. And to have that autonomy and sort of self-agency taken away can exacerbate mental health issues that people may be experiencing, substance use issues that they may have. Those crowded spaces, there are incidents of people feel threatened for personal space, not only in that sort of psychological space, but very real physical space, fear of violence, sexual violence, theft. And we know from COVID that those spaces were also conducive to communicable diseases, right? Mm-hmm. And so in a lot of ways, they are suboptimal. And they're also separating people from their support networks, right? If you have to separate from your partner, from your pet, from your family, that impairs your ability to access care and manage your medical conditions as well.
There is a lot of misinformation and perhaps what you might call misconceptions about being unhoused, in particular about how someone might become unhoused. As an instructor, what do your conversations with your students look like about how to work with and how to treat unhoused people who come to you as patients?
Yeah, so most of my instruction is in the clinical setting. So I work with trainees like residents and medical students. I think some of the misconceptions I most commonly see are sort of stereotyping surrounding how you identify homelessness, and kind of what you're saying is like what brings homelessness and like what they think they're looking for, something very visible to them. And when in reality, homelessness can be caused by a variety of factors, economic hardships, loss of employment, medical crises, family breakdown, and ultimately just the lack of affordable housing. So reminding trainees and students that they need to actually ask their patients about their risk for homelessness and housing instability, and that patients can be families and children, and that in fact a third of patients experiencing homelessness are now over age 50. So we have a big geriatric population of patients experiencing homelessness, and to kind of be flexible in what they're looking for.
That's heartbreaking. How frequently do unhoused people who are treated at the emergency department come back?
They come back a lot, yes. So frequent visitations, I think that also comes into a misconception, right? So if you're looking at the population sort of people experiencing homelessness, right? I would say studies have shown about half of those folks don't use the emergency department. So there is this sort of like bias that people who are experiencing homelessness are always in the emergency department, when actually, there's a big segment of people who just avoid institutionalization of any kind, whether it's shelters or the emergency department. And then you have that subset of people who use the emergency department a lot, and it can be up to 3, 4, 7 times someone who's housed. And there are a lot of things that contribute to that. And I think, again, with misconceptions, is that they're coming there for shelter, for food, because of substance use. When in actuality, people experiencing homelessness are much more likely to have chronic medical conditions like diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, and that's what brings them to the emergency department. And they're more likely to be admitted to the hospital once they're there. And when they are admitted, they're more likely to stay in the hospital for more days than if they were housed for the same conditions. So it's a very different medical experience for someone who's experiencing homelessness.
Tell me a little bit about medication-assisted therapy. Is it working for this demographic in our cities?
I mean, I'm always an advocate of medication for opioid use disorder, and I do think it does work. I think that the evidence has shown that housing instability is a barrier, and experiencing homelessness and experiencing unsheltered homelessness makes it hard to engage with medication-assisted therapy. A recent study came out that sort of modeled what are the impacts of encampment displacement on opioid-related outcomes, and it projected increased overdose mortality and a decrease in medical therapies for opioid use disorder.
And it's a particularly vulnerable time. I mean, this is a vulnerable demographic, but particularly even more at risk following what is referred to as these encampment sweeps. So when encampments are cleared out, describe what happens, and do you at the time see more adverse health outcomes, and how is your department addressing this?
Yeah, you definitely see more adverse health outcomes. I think I want to be fair in acknowledging that there are risks to health and safety to unsheltered homelessness, whether you're in an encampment or otherwise. That those do exist. But as we heard today, there are also a lot of really important benefits to encampments as a form of unsheltered homelessness. And so what happens when you break up that encampment is that you are disrupting that sense of community and support. The displacement and loss of personal belongings can exacerbate mental health challenges, including depression, anxiety, and trauma. And it exposes people to additional health risks, and that they can lose access to on-site medical services if they've been there, harm reduction supplies that might have been there. A lot of outreach workers will know to show up there for their clients, and so you may disrupt that relationship to outreach workers. People lose their medications, their documents, their phones, so their ability to maintain their health becomes a problem.
Yes, and you might be familiar with the recent JAMA study. I think it came out in April in the Journal of the American Medical Association that found encampment sweeps correlated with higher mortality rates and higher rates of hospitalization in the demographic that had substance use disorder. Yes.
There was increased in overdose mortality, as well as even aside from mortality, that also showed that substance use-related infections such as endocarditis or abscesses were projected to increase, and that it also showed a decrease in engagement with medication-assisted opioid use disorder. So it just spirals.
It's a cascading effect. Now, in addition to medical treatment, what does your hospital ED offer in terms of socioeconomic support to unhoused patients?
Yeah, so our emergency department, we are staffed 24/7 with social work. We also have care coordinators that can help us with sort of placement in sort of rehab and respite placement for people who aren't going to be able to manage their medical condition at home, but maybe don't require hospitalization. We also have Project Assert with folks who help people connect to substance use resources within the community and are very well versed in what's available for people experiencing homelessness.
As a doctor, what is the single most important thing you've learned from treating unhoused people?
I think that it has humbled me in what I can fix and can't. That I can prescribe all the antibiotics I may want, but if I can't prescribe someone housing, I can't prescribe someone access to consistent sanitation, and that those are. It really shows me where my limits are, but also then tells me like where I need to apply my voice and be, a member of my community. I'm not just a doctor at the day of that problem.
Thank you, Caitlin. A pleasure to talk to you today, instructor in emergency medicine at Yale. I'm Sujata Srinivasan. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Thanks for listening. Have a lovely day and be well.